I remember the first time I came across the concept that diverse teams are more creative was when I was a young manager, and I read a book called by Rosabeth Moss-Kanter called The Change Masters. And I was really excited by this because it underlined my experience. And to be honest, it spoke to my prejudices. And these days, we've got a lot more evidence than I think she must have been one of the first people to kind of research that. But these days, we've got a lot more evidence that demonstrates that. And so when I'm thinking about good board composition, I'm certainly thinking about diversity of identity, but I'm not just thinking about that. I'm not talking about positive discrimination. There's lots of people who get muddled up here and think that we're talking positive discrimination. This is absolutely not what it's about. But we need diverse thinkers for good decision making and people with a diverse approach to others for engagement. And we need people who support and challenge in different ways. And I think the issue is that at the moment, our best proxy for diversity of thought is diversity of identity. It's not a great proxy, but if you've got another one, do let me know, because I haven't been able to think of one. And we need to think about that diversity of identity, not just in terms of the common classifications or the protected characteristics or whatever you want to talk about, but much more broadly than that. And we are at least starting to think now about socioeconomic background, but it's not, my view is that the classification of socioeconomic background isn't particularly good at the moment. Certainly doesn't work for me. I can't answer the question about school because I went to what I would describe as a crap school, but one that most people would describe as a special school. That was local authority funded, but because it was a charity, it was independent. So you tell me which box I'm supposed to tick on the thing. Anyway, so in terms of the common classifications, I'm white, I'm British, I'm divorced, I'm straight, I'm childless, I'm Christian, I'm older disabled woman, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. But I'm so much more than that. So I'm all the skills and the experience that my somewhat eclectic career has furnished me with, and my childhood experiences and values. I'm middle class, and whereas I can roll a mile on somebody's working class wheels, I can't identify directly with them. I'm someone who has to organise their life, sometimes down to the last minute, in order to take part in normal day-to-day activities. And I'm a natural project manager as a result of that. Give me a task, and I'm going to instantly work out the critical path and the dependencies. Through bitter experience, but now something that I actually quite celebrate, I've learned I don't think the same way when I look, as others people do when I look at a problem. I'm pretty obviously disabled, but many disabled people don't have visible impairments. And disability on boards isn't measured yet. And usually, and actually this shocks me every time, and I don't understand why, because I ought to be used to it. I have to ask specifically for my disability to be recorded alongside any other diversity information in our annual reports. So I have to say, please could you add that one board member identifies as disabled? That just seems nuts to me. Because it really makes me wonder, because boards are generally drawn from an older demographic. Disability is more prevalent in the older population. So I suspect there are an awful lot of disabled people on boards. They're just not out. And if a board's really genuine about wanting diversity in the organisation, what's it doing about tone from the top? And why won't people say? I find this a real challenge, and I know people tell me how terribly private all the information is, and that's why people don't like saying so. But if we say we want a diverse organisation and we'd like people to declare so that we can measure our statistics, why the heck won't board members do it in order to demonstrate a good example? Anyway, that's just me ranting for a moment. One of the key things that boards need is people with commitment, resilience, and staying power to deal with the unexpected. I suspect loads of boards have found out what stuff their NEDs are made of recently with COVID and now the cost of living crisis. And if you're wondering what disabled people can add to a board, here's the thing. Most of us have had to build substantial resilience just to cope with everyday knockbacks. But the question is less for me about how do we go about recruiting people. It's much more about when they get there, are they going to feel welcome? How inclusive is your board? Do the people who you want to join, can they bring their best self to the work of the board? And if not, what do you need to change? So for instance, how can a visually impaired person give their best if you can't produce the board pack promptly in a format they can use, or if you table papers? And if someone on your board lip reads, do you make sure they can always see a speaker's face, or does everyone look at the chair? And would you have the first idea how to work with a deaf person who uses an interpreter? And what about people who don't talk like the rest of you do? Are your board members going to look down on them? I mean, without actually saying that that's what they're doing, obviously. And what kind of conversations do you have in the coffee break? Women have long complained about conversations that can exclude them, which traditionally used to be football and golf. I don't think it is these days. And I have a problem with informal chat. Most of you probably don't realise, but if you use social care like I do, you can't have more than £23,500 in assets of any description, except the house you live in and your main vehicle. So there's no room in my life for a villa in Tuscany or a sailing boat or all the other things that my colleagues on boards do have a habit of talking about. And I just don't feel part of it. I don't have children either. And now that I am about to chair a university come 1st of August, I might be interested in what your children are doing at university, but what if your children haven't chosen that route? Isn't that you need to stop talking about the things you want to talk about? You just have to remember that not everybody can engage with those sorts of things, and make sure that someone isn't being consistently excluded. Sometimes it's the little things. It's like, we've always done it this way. Meeting start time is one of my bugbears. I often need to point out to my chairs that timing's an access issue, because I use PA support and it takes me a while to go to the loo. I need to make sure that my PA knows roughly when the breaks are, so they're not off doing something else. I like going to the loo themselves, for instance. And I need to make sure that the common refrain, sorry everybody, we're running a bit late, so just grab a cup of coffee and we'll carry on the meeting. That just does not work for me. I need that time. And what if you use professional childcare and you need to leave the meeting promptly at the end to pick your child up? A meeting that drifts on because it's not being chaired properly may mean that you have to choose between missing some vital decision or being fined by the nursery. And does your board always meet on a Friday afternoon? At least 2 religious groups would have problems with that. How much effort do people need to feel included? Because at the moment, a lot of people on boards who are different are having to make that effort themselves. If you're not sure about that, you need to do something about your culture. So you need to talk to your board members, all of them, about what suits, or ask your chair to. Probably try and persuade your chair to if you're not the chair. You might be surprised by the hoops that some people have to jump through in order to engage effectively. And that will not just be obvious, glaringly obvious people like me. When I chaired Scope, a group of trustees used to go down to the pub after the board meetings on a Friday afternoon. A couple of my months into my chairship, it became apparent that it was always the same trustees and others felt excluded. And it wasn't that the pub-going group intended to exclude, and actually they were rather surprised when I tackled the issue. But we kind of had to do a reset, and we had to make it clear that that invitation was for everyone. So what we did to start with was we set up something we used to call organised fun, spontaneous organised fun. We instituted organised visits to the pub, and gradually those trustees who'd felt excluded, they then began to join the others when the meetings weren't spontaneous organised fun. But then you've got to think about something a bit more fundamental than that. Does everybody want to go to the pub? Because actually teetotalers, those who don't drink for religious reasons, recovering alcoholics, they would also have been excluded. And things like that are often hidden, but they really matter when it comes to building a diverse, strong, diverse board. And to be inclusive, you've got to be unrelenting in elevating and stimulating that debate about uncomfortable truths and the tensions you might be tempted to sweep under the rug, let's say. And don't just leave it to that person that's different to do all the running for this. And when you're recruiting, if you've got a say in the process, make sure the focus stays on the full range of diversity that you need around the table. But you don't just want to go out and collect difference. There aren't enough places at the table to have a comprehensive selection of people if the board is to be effective. Sometimes we used to talk about having people who were representative of. I don't think anybody's representative of anything. I wrote a LinkedIn article at one point about that, because I don't understand how anybody can represent anybody else, and I don't think that's what we're there for as board members. But you need an honest look at the board, including skills and experience, together with what the organisation is going to need moving forward, and that has to be the starting point. And above all, I'd say beware creeping risk aversion in the recruitment process. So I'm going to finish with a little story, because I once applied for the chair role of a third sector body. It was really exciting, but when I looked at the previous chairs, they had all been health economists. Now I've tinkered with health economics, but really if I'm anything in the economics field, I'm a transport economist. So I grilled the headhunter. I thought, right, I'm not putting in an application and doing all that work if actually what they really want is a health economist. And I was assured that the trustees were really keen to broaden out. They wanted more diversity. And so I duly applied and I was shortlisted. And I reached the final interview stage and I didn't get the job. And guess what? The person who got it was a pure health economist. So don't just let your organisation end up with a file full of diverse shortlists, but no diversity on your board. Be prepared to take that risk when you make that final decision, and you'll probably find it wasn't a risk at all. Thank you.